All right, today we're going to dive into a scientific review that looks at a pretty wild idea. Could a handful of common, super cheap deworming drugs actually be a key to fighting cancer? Now I know, it sounds a little out there, it's definitely controversial, but it has a surprisingly long history and a ton of research behind it. So let's get into it and see what the science actually says.
And this is really the big question, isn't it? The source material we're digging into today makes a pretty strong case that the answer just might be yes. And it all goes back to a theory that's been kind of bubbling just under the surface of medicine for more than 100 years.
So you're probably wondering, where did this whole idea even come from? Well, it's not as new as you might think. We've actually got to go way back, to a time when scientists were really just starting to get a handle on what cancer is. Yeah, this link between parasites and cancer, it goes way, way back. It kind of started as just an observation in 1893. A doctor named Roswell Park described cancer cells as acting parasitic. Fast forward to the 60s, another doctor, Alphonse Weber, was actually documenting parasites inside human tumors. And the idea just kept popping up. Then, get this, in 2015, the CDC reports this totally stunning case, a guy whose tumors were literally made of cancerous tapeworm cells. So while it's definitely not a mainstream idea, it's one that has never really gone away.
Okay, so that brings us to the stars of the show today, the specific drugs this research paper is all about. And we're not talking about brand new, cutting-edge chemotherapies. Nope, we're talking about common dewormers that have been around forever.
First up, you've got ivermectin. This is a drug so incredible, it won a Nobel Prize for basically wiping out horrible diseases like river blindness. Then you have this other class of drugs, the benzimidazoles, which includes mebendazole, a really common dewormer for people that's been used for decades. The really crucial thing to get here is their track record. These aren't some new unknown substances. They have an amazing safety profile and have been used by billions of people. So, the million-dollar question. How on earth could a drug that's designed to kill a worm have any effect on a cancer cell? Well, the scientific review we're looking at pulls together some fascinating research that suggests it's not just one thing. It's more like they launch a full-on, multi-pronged attack. And this is where it gets really interesting. The research shows these drugs don't just have one trick up their sleeve. They basically launch an all-out assault. You know, one of the biggest challenges in cancer treatment is that tumors are smart. They can outwit a single line of attack. But what we're talking about here is a whole different ballgame. These drugs seem to do everything from helping your own immune system finally see the tumor to killing off the nasty cancer stem cells that fuel regrowth and even making traditional therapies like chemo work better. Let's dig into a couple of these. Okay, let's start with maybe one of the most powerful ideas here, turning a cold tumor hot. Now, a cold tumor, think of it as wearing an invisibility cloak. Your immune system just doesn't see it, so it can't attack it. Well, what the research suggests is that ivermectin can basically rip off that cloak, light a fire under that tumor, and turn it hot, making it a bright, shining target for your body's own defense system. And this isn't just a theory. You can see it plain as day in a 2021 study on mice. Just look at the results. The control group? Not good. Ivermectin by itself? It helped a bit for sure. But that bottom row, that's the money shot. When you combine ivermectin with immunotherapy, which is a treatment designed to supercharge the immune system, the results were just dramatic. A huge reduction in tumors and the best survival rate by far. It's like ivermectin paints a giant target on the tumor and the immunotherapy comes in and destroys it. Now for a completely different angle of attack. The other class of drugs, the benzimidazoles, like mebendazole, they go after something called microtubules. You can think of these as the internal skeleton or the scaffolding of a cell. Cancer cells absolutely need the scaffolding to divide and grow like crazy. Well, mebendazole just comes in and makes the whole thing fall apart. And again, the results from mouse studies are pretty incredible. In this experiment, they gave oral mebendazole to mice with lung cancer. By day 14, tumor growth had just stopped, and by day 21, the tumors were actually shrinking. So by taking out that cellular skeleton, the drug basically just choked off the cancer's ability to keep growing. Okay, so we've seen the lab science, but the research paper also gets into the human side of this, which, let's be honest, is what brought this whole topic so much attention in the first place. It's really a journey from these personal, anecdotal stories to actual documented scientific case reports. And this is the story that really went viral. Joe Tippins was given a terrifying prognosis, and as he writes on his blog, he started taking a regimen that included fenbendazole, which is a veterinary dewormer. His recovery brought a massive amount of public interest to this whole idea. But his story also raises a really critical question. What actually counts as evidence? And that brings us to a super important point. We have to be crystal clear about the difference here. An anecdotal report, like a blog post or a personal story, can be incredibly powerful and inspiring, but it's not scientific proof. A peer-reviewed case report, on the other hand, that's different. That's a report that gets published in a medical journal, where it's been picked apart and vetted by other scientists. It's a much, much higher standard of evidence. And the paper we're looking at covers both. So let's look at one of those peer-reviewed reports. This was a 74-year-old man. He had metastatic colon cancer, and he'd already failed conventional therapy. He had run out of options. So he was given mebendazole for 6 weeks. And the results, which were documented right there in the journal, they were stunning. His liver tumors, partial remission. The cancer in his lungs and lymph nodes, complete remission. Now, it's just one case, but it's a powerfully documented one.
So you've got all this lab data. You've got these incredible case reports. What's next? Where do we go from here? The paper argues pretty forcefully that the path forward lies in a really smart concept called drug repurposing.
Drug repurposing is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You take a drug that's already approved, that we already know is safe for one thing, and you use it for something new. The massive advantage is you get to skip years of early safety trials, which makes it a much faster and way cheaper path to developing new treatments.
And the paper makes the case that these dewormers are pretty much perfect candidates for this. Why? Well, first, their safety record is rock solid. Second, they're super cheap generics. Third, as we've just seen, there's a growing mountain of preclinical evidence. And fourth, they don't necessarily have to replace standard therapy. They might actually make it work even better.
But, and this is a really big but, it's not all smooth sailing. The paper is very clear about this. Mebendazole, for example, isn't approved for humans. We still don't know the right doses for cancer treatment. And most importantly, personal stories and a few case studies, no matter how compelling, are not enough. Without large-scale, formal clinical trials, this is never going to become a mainstream treatment. And all of this builds to the paper's final, pretty forceful conclusion. It's not really a suggestion, it's a call to action. I'm just going to read it directly. The authors state that based on all the evidence they've gathered, quote, "It is time to move this process forward and incorporate ivermectin, mebendazole, and fenbendazole into mainstream cancer therapy." So, at the end of the day, could one of the next big breakthroughs in cancer treatment come from a humble deworming medicine? Is this a genuine breakthrough hiding in plain sight? The scientific review we've just walked through makes a very compelling argument that we owe it to patients to run the proper clinical trials and finally find out for sure.